Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Red Path. It's Dara here again today. We've got an episode of the Delvarus in the Details painting series for you. This one's going to be all about basing, the first in a couple of episodes series about different types of basing. Very popular kind of video that's been requested of me for a long time. Finally got around to doing it. So grab yourselves a brew and let's get into this. Okay, so first up in this mini-series on basing, I'm going to be covering the type of basing I do for my own world eaters, which is sort of a Wartorn Wasteland kind of look. So lots of reddish-brown, muddy kind of textures mixed in with some debris and stones, that sort of thing. It's a very kind of typical basing scheme that you're going to see in a lot. It's applicable across basically a wide range of 40k armies and even Age of Sigmar 30k ones as well. But yeah, basically that kind of idea of an area that's been completely decimated by war. There's remnants of old battles as well as fresh ones all across the kind of area. It's a look that I think works particularly well for world leaders given their constant warring nature. So that's going to be my own one. In future videos we're going to dive into some other types of basing, such as like trench warfare, snowy bases, lava bases, all that kind of good stuff. But for now I'm going to stick with what I know best, give you guys an idea of kind of how I go about building bases. And on that note, I generally tend to try and recycle and reuse a lot of materials that you might get sort of in your day-to-day lives, but also when you're kind of like accumulating hobby sort of materials as well. So you're going to see me using a lot of materials that you should be able to get your hands on fairly easily, which can be integrated into these bases to sort of use them in ways that you probably haven't thought of using them before. So you know, that's going to be pretty fun. Some nice little uses for things you might not have seen. So let's get into this video. We're going to start by building the bases and then we're going to move on to painting.
Okay, so we're going to start this one off by assembling the base. So the first thing I like to do when I'm making these sort of wastelandy bases is put down some stones. I think that's like a good foundation. And we're going to kind of put down some of the like bigger material that we're going to have on the base first, and then kind of build up the textures and stuff around that, because it's generally easier to do that. So I've just got some of this this cork board here. I get mine from the army painter, but I also have like sheets of cork as well. Like this is some of it here that I also use, and you can kind of buy them in big sheets and just break them up, turn them into stones. It's pretty useful. They're pretty cheap as well. So we're going to start by just, you know, putting down some of this stonework. So we're just going to add a little bit of glue. You don't want to go too overboard with this as well. Just plop them down. Kind of anywhere that seems a little bit logical. I'm just going to put down one other small one as well. And then we'll pretty kind of good to go to start building up some texture. Might build a couple of bases and show you some variation between the different types we can make as well as I'm doing this. Yeah, it's pretty simple stuff. Okay, we'll just let those dry out. So yeah, there's some stones there. One other thing I really like to use is I like to kind of create like exposed piping, as if like, you know, this was once a city and then some of the ground has been disrupted, some of the underground piping is broken up and stuff. So for that I actually really like to use these brush tops. You get them on top of all GW brushes that you get, so pretty useful. Just keep a hold of these if ever you use them. And what we can do is we can just take our spruce nips and just cut them at an angle. Something like this. There we go. So you get these cool kind of like tops like that, and basically you can kind of position them, you know, on the base, something so it's like jutting up like that kind of a thing, or you can cut them in half as well. Probably going to make this one a little bit shorter because the base is kind of small. There we go. And we're just going to put that down, I think, somewhere around this rock. Make it look like it's kind of coming up from beneath the rock. Just like this. We're going to build up some textures and stuff around it as well to make it look a bit more weathered and worn. But right now we're just going to make sure that it's all glued down. So I think that's pretty okay as the beginning of this base. I'm going to bash up a couple of more and show you guys kind of what that's going to look like, so we'll come back for that. Okay, so I've added some skulls and stones and other bits and pieces to these other bases. We're going to start adding some sterling battle mire now to start building up some texture. Basically, we're going to work this over in 2 layers altogether. So the first one is going to be kind of laying down a foundation, and then the second layer will be building upon that. So you can kind of play around with it here. It doesn't really matter if you kind of go over some of the details from the previous steps. That's okay too. But it's very simple. Basically, play with it around the rocks and stuff and kind of build it up so it's a kind of more natural blend into the surrounding environment. Yeah, pretty easy step. We're going to come back once we have all that finished. Okay, so we have the bases pretty much ready now. They're all modeled up. You can see here, you know, we got some nice textures laid down after we put down that sterling battle mire, and it's kind of created this like natural look. It's pretty decent. So what we're going to do now is we're going to prime these, and then we're going to get to painting the bases. Okay, so we finished priming our bases now, and you know, you can see they're looking a bit more unified and stuff. We're going to start laying down some paint on them. So I'm going to go with kind of like a basic tone for these, and we're going to build up some muddy textures and then pencil in some of the details before finishing it off. It won't take too long, so let's dive into that. Start with some base coats. So we're just going to start this one off with a base coat of scorched brown. We're just going to blast this basically all over the muddy parts and the skull that we have here as well. Obviously nothing too complicated here. We're just going straight out of the pot as well, no need to water this down. Yeah, nice and easy, and we'll come back then to start adding some detail to this mod. Okay, so now that we have that base coat laid down, we're going to start with a relatively heavy dry brush of Mornfang brown, and we're basically just going to do this over all the muddy areas. You can be kind of pretty loose with this dry brush as well. You know, the whole point of mud and kind of dirt variation like this is that it's quite random on the ground. You know, like the pattern of mud doesn't really exist. It's just mud. So for these early dry brushes, we're going to kind of lay down basically a coat over all the mud, and then as we work in kind of lighter tones later on, we're going to start kind of like sporadically applying it to certain areas to sort of simulate different kind of like textures in the mud and stuff like that, if that makes sense. But yeah, for now we're just going to kind of get this rough dry brush laid down just to give an overall kind of sense of tone and color to the base. So that's that. We'll come back with the next one then. Okay, so now we're going to hit it with a dry brush of Scrag Brown in much the same way as the Mornfang there. We're just going to kind of work all over the base here, and this will have kind of like established like a muddy foundation that we can kind of build up some other textured layers on now after this. So you can see already, you know, we're getting a little bit of tone between the 3 different sort of brown layers that we have, and it's kind of starting to come together a little bit, but right now it still looks pretty rough. We're going to clear that up in the next couple of steps, so let's tune in for those next. Okay, so now we're going to actually take some Steel Legion Drab and do a sort of dry brush here again, but we're going to kind of like attack it in a different pattern where it's more like we're stabbing at the base with a dry brush rather than brushing over it. And the reason for this is it'll create patches where that older mud color is going to be showing through, while also still leaving some of the newer tones that we're laying down here. And basically this is a technique that we're going to be using over a couple of different layers now to build up some kind of like tonal variation in the mud, where there's a mix of wet, dry, and different types of muddy textures going on the base. So once this dries out, we're going to hit it with another similar dry brush. Next time it's going to be Carrick Stone. So I'm going to show you all what that looks like next. Okay, so we're hitting it with that Carrick Stone layer now. And again, we're kind of attacking it in this like sort of stabbing motion, as you can see. And you can see we're leaving behind some of that previous layer, but also there's these patches with the new layer building up. And if you can kind of see here, we're actually getting this really interesting sort of like muddy variation going on, which is pretty fun to play around with. And the thing here is not to overwork it too much, because if you keep kind of working on it, you can tend to like lose those earlier tones. So we're going to leave it at that just for now. We might do one more quick pass when this is dry with Carrick Stone again, just to pick out some areas and brighten it up a little bit more. But for now, I think this is good. We'll tune in for the next step. So we're going for our final kind of like stab dry brush layer now, and this time we're just using Xandri dust. I've taken almost all the paint off the brush for this one, and we just want a really light one, although we are going to kind of focus on the skull a little bit here because we want that to kind of stand out as a bright part. But yeah, literally just like one or two dabs in certain areas is more than enough to kind of like highlight this muddy texture. Because again, you can really overwork it and it starts to lose that natural look if you do. So yeah, I think this is pretty good for the mud parts for now anyway. We're going to start penciling in the stone next, so let's tune in for that. Okay, so we have a nice easy recipe for the stone here. We're going to start with a base coat of Eshin Grey over all the areas where there's any kind of exposed stony parts or rocks or boulders or anything like that. Now, you don't really have to be too careful about the sort of like border between stone and mud here. And it's actually kind of good sometimes to have a bit of a blend there, as it kind of like symbolizes that natural sort of gradation that you would see. Yeah, this is pretty simple. We're just going to lay this this coat down, and then we're going to come back for a quick dry brush step. Okay, so we're going to be hitting the stone areas with a dry brush of Administratum Grey, and this is sort of similar to that previous dry brush where we're kind of coming at it with a stabbing motion, paying kind of closer attention to the edges of the rocks where there is that kind of like wear and tear from natural elements over time. You can kind of be as heavy or as light as you want here, depending on the tone that you want on your rocks. I like to vary it up, sometimes doing like dry brushing, just to kind of like get some variation in the actual like rock textures and things like that. But yeah, it's really simple to do, and once we have that, we're gonna be kind of moving on to some washes and finishing touches on this little base here. So yeah, we'll tune in for that next. Okay, so we're actually just going to hit the whole base up with a wash now of good old Agrax Earthshade, and we don't want to go like too heavy with this wash. We're going to get like quite a lot on at the start and kind of drag it around over the base because we don't really want to lose too much detail. It's more just a kind of tone setter more than anything else really, just to kind of unite some of the different features here. We're going to wash the rocks as well. It kind of helps sort of bring them together with all the muck and stuff before we add some finishing touches to kind of bring all that together. And I also, just off camera, I put a base of gunmetal on the exposed kind of metal parts like the pipe there and stuff. You can really use any kind of dark metal tone for that, whatever suits yourself, it's not really important. Yeah, we're going to get that laid down, and then we'll come back once it's dry. Okay, so the wash is pretty much dried out now, and you can see it's kind of unified the base quite nicely. We're just going to go back in with a quick highlight dry brush using Administratum Grey on the stones, just to make them pop out a little bit more from the mud, because the Agrax can kind of make it blend a little bit too much, but by adding this little dry brush, you know, we can really make them kind of stand out again, but we're keeping that kind of wash layer too, so it sort of binds it all together quite nicely. So you can see we have this quite nice effect now with the stone. And we're going to basically do the same thing on the little skull here, but we're going to do that with Zandri just to make it pop out. So yeah, we'll come back once that's done. Okay, so we're almost finished with this now. What I like to do at the end to bring it all together is go in with a light dusting of dark earth pigment powder and just kind of bring it over the mud mostly, but also work it a little bit up on the stones like this. And bring it over the skull as well. Now, I don't do a heavy layer of this or anything, just a dusting, as I said. Basically, to kind of get that final finishing touch going on the base. You can see it's kind of bringing those rocks and all the surrounding kind of parts that stick up from the base into this very nice kind of unified look. So yeah, it's really simple, nice way to kind of finish it off, bring the whole thing together, and you're left with this nice kind of like wastelandy looking base. So we're just going to do the black rim, we're just going to paint around that with Chaos Black, and then we're pretty much done. Okay, so that's going to be that for the Wasteland and kind of old Warzone base. This is what I use for my own world leaders mostly, and I'm quite happy with the finished kind of product. It looks somewhat natural and also showing remnants of, you know, recent struggles with the skull and the kind of exposed piping and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a fun little kind of way of bringing life into your models and kind of placing them in an environment. And basing overall is really important and something that even I admittedly struggle to really pay as much attention to as I probably should. But yeah, this has been the first one of that. Let's wrap that video up and see where we go from there.
Well everyone, I hope you enjoyed that video and learned a thing or two about my own basing scheme. It's a pretty fun one to make. Basing is not my favourite part of the hobby. It's one I admittedly struggle with quite a lot to make it look cool. But I think I've kind of conveyed a little bit of my own ideas when it comes to basing in this video. I hope you found it useful. Maybe you picked up some new tricks, some new ways to use things that you might have lying around. But yeah, it's pretty fun and I'm looking forward to trying out the next one. Until then everyone, stay healthy, stay safe, and kill main burn.